In the beginning, the fact that pictures could move was magic enough. Snapshots were brought to life in these early scenes of everyday events. Entrepreneurs such as Thomas Edison realized they could bring entertainment to the masses with these simple films. The Lumiere brothers were the first to project a moving picture to the paying public. Their film, Arrival of a Train, is said to have caused the audiences to bound from their seats in shock at the approach of the train. One of the earliest films to use the camera for a special effect was The Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. The Queen kneels at the block, and a life-size dummy replaces the actress. More than a few viewers marveled at the actress's sacrifice. The French magician cinematographer Georges Méliès is considered to be the father of special effects. Méliès realized the camera could be used to manipulate reality. In his most famous film, A Trip to the Moon, Méliès uses split screen, multiple exposures, and mechanical stage tricks to produce a humorous and innovative fantasy. A Trip to the Moon deserves its place in history as the first science fiction film. In the early 1900s, movies seemed to have lost their popularity. Taking a cue from Méliès, filmmakers captured popular imagination by using a narrative, giving the movies a fresh lease on life. The Great Train Robbery consisted of scenes placed together to tell a story. With its non-theatrical sets and dramatic close-ups rather than stage props, gimmicks, or tricks, the audiences of the day were stunned. This early Western made use of some of the first matte shots. In the mail car, the landscape can be seen through the open door. When the film of the landscape was shot, the set area was masked off. Then the film was rewound and the set area photographed with the door area masked off. The resulting film was a composite. By 1912, glass shots and miniatures were used to replace or add portions to a scene. Even the most famous of all movie sets, the Walls of Babylon, built for D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, had cutouts and glass shots to increase the size and detail of the set. Large panes of glass were set between the camera and background, and miniatures were strategically placed. In the 20s, epics like Ben-Hur used miniatures hanging between the camera and full-scale sets to create the appearance of one single massive stadium. Fritz Lang's futuristic fantasy Metropolis impressively blended every tool available to the special effects teams. With the advent of sound, overnight, the fundamentals of filmmaking changed. The need to shoot on sound stages triggered the studios to develop their special effects departments in a systematic way. With pools of technical talent, the effects departments created many new techniques, leading in just a few short years to RKO Pictures' release in 1933 of King Kong. Kong was the logical extension of the films of Méliès, Griffith, and Lang. Live action combined with large-scale mechanical effects and Willis O'Brien's innovative summation created a compelling sense of reality. Much of the background of this cave set scene has been painted on glass. Intricate miniature sets have been combined with previously photographed live action projected onto miniature screens camouflaged by rocks. Adding the 18-inch stop-motion Kong creates a scene of astonishing realism. This film is as entertaining today as it was 60 years ago, and many of the techniques developed for King Kong are still used in today's modern epics.
In the early days, we had 7 major studios, and there were effects departments in all of them. Fortunately, at RKO, being the smallest studio, we did everything in the one department, and therefore I had the opportunity of learning by working in all these categories. Since the studios closed, then naturally there had to be independent effects houses to handle all this work. And many of the fellows that worked in the studios opened up their own places like I did and carried on into the independent field.
What we've done is basically become the effects department for the studios. We're like a little mini studio ourselves. We have all the various departments under one roof that enable us to do visual effects from start to finish. If I'd walk around the studio in my mind, you would have the art department, you'd have the production office, you'd have the shooting stage, the model shop, the matte painting department, you'd have film processing, animation, optical, editorial, of course, projection, engineering, both electronic and mechanical. All these are various departments, and the beauty of having them all under one roof is there's a cross-pollination that happens, so that somebody from another department may even come up with an idea that will affect you. So it's a great sort of think tank approach to creating sort of impossible images in a lot of cases. Sid is a really talented person and peculiarly talented in terms of future think. He thinks in terms of how designs will be in the next century, or and he has a real good sense of that, and he's a great designer on top of that. So not only does he know how it will look, but he knows how to make it look that way.
The rocket ships, all those set designs were done specifically to make the story more dramatic and more entertaining and more believable to a large audience.
Sid does not design every section and every piece. It's a feeling that he comes across, and so you need to have basically an architect who can take that basic conceptual idea and make it work in all of the various details of the model.
Models are used when either the real article is not available, or it's, for instance, in a spaceship, it doesn't exist, so you have to build it in a model. For instance, back in the old days, when, say they needed an ancient castle, obviously in Hollywood or Los Angeles, there are no castles, so they have to be built in miniature.
Die Hard, they would not allow us to damage the Fox Plaza building. So we had to build miniatures of the Fox Plaza and then crash the helicopter off the top of it. With miniature pyrotechnics, you have to make everything burn much slower and still have enough power to destroy the device. Rolling and speed. The helicopter was ignited. Then a computer was triggered, which lit the fire on the building, threw the helicopter off. We were basically hired to patch up problems they couldn't get in live action.
On Ghostbusters, I was called in to oversee the Terror Dog characters. I redesigned them based on their concepts, and then sculpted the miniature stop-motion puppet, which is a quarter scale. Oversaw the sculpting that Mike Hosh led of the larger, full-size versions, because they worked both as stop-motion puppets and as full-size on-set props. And then actually did the animation of the characters when they were running around and leaping and doing all that sort of thing. Stop motion's a process that utilizes the uniqueness of the movie-making illusion, where you actually are seeing a series of still images projected in rapid succession to give the illusion of movement. With stop motion, you fool the mind by shooting a succession of still images in what you infer would be the increments that they would appear had this character you're pushing around been moving in the real world, in real time. When you're ready to shoot the frame, you turn on the camera controller. It interlocks the camera and the projector. This character is photographed after the live action has been photographed. You shoot a frame of the creature in conjunction with a single frame of movie film projected behind it. There are all sorts of ways to bring creatures to life, of course. Stop motion is one of many.
Hello everyone, I'm the big new star of the big new movie, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And here's someone very special to tell you all about it.
The technology is evolving so quickly that the things that we're doing in this picture now we couldn't have done 6 years ago in the other movie.
Because the lip sync is so difficult to perform live and take so many people, and because Tony Randall talks so quickly in this film, I decided that the best way to do that is to pre-program all the lip sync dialogue and perform the rest of it live. Then you actually just program the upper lip first, and then the lower lip and the tongue and the jaw, each a separate pass, and then the Gilder flip will play it back at real time.
Boy, this is a really good movie. And there you have it. A true, unsolicited testimonial from Gizmo himself, in his very own words. So listen to Gizmo. You know he'd never lie to anyone.
If a little gizmo or a gremlin is crawling along the floor, there's usually a hole in the floor. And so it's always a big question mark as to where this hole needs to be. So first we start out with a small hole, about 3 inches, and then later on at the end of the day or the end of the shooting of this particular sequence, the set will look like Swiss cheese because there's holes all over the place. They're not 3 inches, but they're this big.
In the second movie, we had already had the experience of doing the first movie, so we were much more prepared and knew pretty much what had been done before and what we wanted to do differently. In a sequel, you have to try to top the first picture, and there were a lot of things that were just not technically possible for us on the time and budget that we had on the first movie that we knew we would have to have in this picture. So when we went to Rick Baker, when we were writing the script, we tried to include him.
They came to me before the script was even finished, and I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? And this would be a really thing to try, and they added that stuff in the script. And every day that we shot, we made up stuff. Joe says, what are we going to have him do today? I was like, well, I don't know. What do you want him to do? He goes, well, have him throw stuff. I said, well, how about if we do this? And he goes, okay. So, that's what was fun about working with Joe. He's real open for suggestion. To create a character, we'll start with a two-dimensional sketch. I usually do drawings first, and sometimes full-color paintings. We sculpt the new features, make molds of those parts. In those molds, we put rubber, which has to be baked in the oven, foam rubber usually. And it's painted, and you put hair on it, and the mechanics are built for it. It has facial mechanics. It really varies for each thing.
I wouldn't exactly know how to tell somebody how to do this, because on the surface, it just looks like you point the camera at it, and you turn it on and you turn it off. But in fact, the number of puppeteers there are and the amount of communication that has to go on to get even the simplest thing to happen when you want it, is just something that comes with practice.
The 1989 Academy Award-winning picture, The Abyss, required all the visual effects tricks known to create an environment seemingly without effects. The effects teams combined radically different environments, water and air, to create the illusion of a futuristic adventure 2,000 feet below the surface of the ocean.
Jim had done a film, his very first attempt at shooting underwater. He said that basically sets that were left underwater overnight were destroyed by the following morning. So it was determined very early on that we would shoot in some sort of tank.
During the filming of the live-action sequences, divers were submerged 6 to 7 hours a day in underwater sets. Scenes too complicated to shoot underwater were filmed in miniature on dry stages.
Jim Cameron, basically did most of the boarding, you know, along with John Bruno for quite some time, came to DreamQuest along with other effects facilities with the idea of breaking down the shots into specific categories or areas. And he came to DreamQuest with most of the motion control type work. Boards were already complete, as if you can probably see some we have up here. Essentially, what he wanted to do was find out our technique and ideas of how we would go about accomplishing the shots. So it did some thinking and came up with some suggestions or ideas of new techniques that might allow the effects to look more realistic than probably could have been done with standard technology.
And action, John.
The director and effects teams built foam core mock-ups of the models and underwater sets to carefully choreograph and plan each scene as it would appear in the final film.
Move in.
Using videotape and stills of a cargo shipwreck 800 feet underwater as reference material, they returned to the stage to match the look of the abyss as closely as possible to reality.
Okay, coming to the stop point.
No, keep going, keep going. Okay. That's just to create a relationship.
FX 57 is a shot where Lindsay and the crew, the group who are in the submersibles, begin the reconnaissance and trying to find a sunken submarine. Basically, what it is a shot of 3 small submersibles going along the hull from the stern of the sub all the way to the bow of the broken nose of the sub. And again, it's being intercut with live-action real footage of submersibles that they did in South Carolina in the big tank. What we did is we used the gantry system, the gantry motion control system, to hang the submersibles and then shot it using about 6 passes, some shot in smoke, some shot in clean air, and through the combination of the passes, filtration, and lighting, we're able to give the feeling that we were shooting actually underwater. Most of the time, when you're doing motion control work, you have separate film elements. In this case, having the actual models working in the same room, in the same environment, it allowed the lights from the submersibles, which were the only light source in the scene, to actually illuminate the background, which in this case was the sunken Montana.
When we started the Abyss, we looked at using traditional techniques. In other words, shooting the subs against a blue screen and compositing them into a background, in this case a Trident submarine. The advantage the gantry system gave us was that we were able to do everything pretty much in camera. We spent the extra time to build this enormous rig, and it took much longer to program because instead of maybe 8 or 12 axes of movement, suddenly we had 32 going all at once, all 3 submarines, and in addition to the camera moves and any other little gags we had going on at the time.
The models on the particular part of the gantry were kind of special in the sense that they had to be self-contained. In other words, the submersibles had to have their own power sources, they had to contain the rear projectors, and they were quite large. Dave Goldberg was in charge of actually designing and coming up with a lot of the solutions in constructing the models.
A rear projection system was used within the submersibles to give the illusion of the actor actually being inside the craft piloting it. The film was shot of the actors in a full-size set prior to our shooting the miniatures, and then used in a projector that was built and put inside the models. The finished illusion would be that even though you were looking at a miniature, you would be seeing live-action people inside of it.
The scenes are shot in separate passes in order to control exposure and color of each element. Using the technology of motion control, the effects teams duplicate the movements of each model perfectly for the final composite. The light from the miniature subs in smoke makes up 1 pass. Another pass in clean air uses fill light in order to see the details of the models. The image of Lindsay is rear projected into the cockpit of the miniatures in a separate pass. The final composite is made up of these and other elements, including a pass for strobe lights and bubbles, which add to the underwater look of the scene.
The sequence is where Lindsay's outside of the broken, damaged deep core, and she's literally on the edge of the abyss, standing there, and she senses this colorful light, and this huge type of ship, kind of glass ship, comes up. And so it's made up of a number of cuts, And the first one is, of course, is a wide-angle shot where we see Lindsay and some of the wreckage and the edge of the abyss as we see the mantis ship rise up and over the edge. That was done dry for wet. In other words, Lindsay, who was actually a stunt person shot months later at Harbor Star in San Pedro, was shot against a blue screen in air. We then cut to a close-up where we're down low looking up as the manta wing kind of passes over top and she reaches up and actually touches the surface. This one we're close enough that the bubbles and her regulator and just the whole way that the water moves and the bubbles come off the top of the manta ship required us to shoot it underwater. In order to give the illusion that her bubbles were coming in contact with the surface of the manta ship, what we did is we hung plexiglass mirrors in the water at the plane of which the wing would actually coincide.
These are the finished boards of the pseudopod sequence, which were the scenes exactly as we would have liked to see them. Looking these over, we sat down one day and said, well, they can't be done. Not by any means that I know of, or other than computer graphics, but we were really nervous about CGI basically because at that time, CGI still looked plastic. Here we were asking it to do water. So we talked about all these other ways. One was replacement animation of acrylic pieces, but with the length of the shots required, we thought that would be insane.
At this point, Dennis Murin of Industrial Light and Magic suggested Alias Research computer animation system to produce the pseudopod.
Those tests showed some possibilities, but initially it looked a little chrome and still a little plastic, but it looked like it was possible at least to get all the motion that we needed. And then we figured if it didn't work, which a lot of us were not really positive, that we would just cut the sequence shorter or we would light it dark.
One of the most difficult problems facing the programmers was putting the actor's face on the head of the pseudopod. A laser scanning system was employed to generate the facial expressions when the pseudopod mimics the actor's faces. The resulting data was fed into the computer graphics system.
Even the best special effect is only as good as the actor's reaction to it. So if you have a really great effect and you cut to an actor who doesn't look like he's believing what he sees, then your effect is no good.
When you create reality, they call it special effects. And it's not an effect, really. When you get through, it's reality. If you don't think it's reality, it's not a good job.
I think that visual effect will continue to expand, and as long as they continue to satisfy the audience's desire to be put in a place they couldn't otherwise possibly be put, they will continue to be successful.